Welcome. Today we're going to talk about the iPad Pro VESA mount that I built because I like the VESA mount. It improves the ergonomics of my iPad, but since purchasing the Smart Keyboard Folio and the Apple Magic Keyboard, I was just finding the clamp to be a pain in the butt, and it had a little bit of wear on the bottom of my iPad. So today I'm going to just talk you through how I built a plywood magnetic VESA stand for my iPad Pro. Buckle up. First off, I want to give credit to Ben Brooks on brooks.net. There'll be a link down below because I saw him do it and then I did my own version of it, basically. I didn't find every idea of his worked for my setup though. So what did we do? First off, I grabbed a sheet of 1/2-inch plywood that I just had around, or a piece of 1/2-inch plywood I had around, and I cut an iPad case that had magnetic attachments, just a cheap one, it doesn't matter. There's a link in the show notes to one that works. I chose a different one because I did, and I actually ordered two, which is good because I made a mistake and needed to use the second one. So I basically threw one away. Find one that's cheap, find one that's magnetic on the back, and that you think you can easily cut the front flap off of. So from there, I traced the iPad back onto the plywood. I cut it out with a skill saw, and then I used a sander to round the edges off. I also took the time to cut out the camera hole just so I can use the camera to, say, scan a credit card or something like that behind it. It also makes the iPad easier to get off because it gives me like a little gap behind the wood where I can grab it. Next up, I traced the VESA holes onto the back of the piece of plywood. Just by eyeing it up, kind of made some center marks, eyed it up, held it there, and traced out all of the holes that were available, and then chose the ones I wanted. Started by drilling in from the back, just because that's where the holes were marked already. I drilled in the holes I wanted. Then I flipped it over and I countersinked the holes. And then I took some of the bolts that I had. I found some black tapered bolts. I think Ben's link recommended silver ones, and I'm gonna recommend the silver ones as well because I found the same black case on Amazon in Canada, but I could not find the same bolts in black on Amazon.com. So I'm gonna link to the silver ones that Ben used. I used the same thing. I just happened to find them in black and silver as the same product entry in Canada. Black was better, I guess. Now, that's actually one of the issues. I need a longer one, really, for the 1/2-inch plywood, so I had to countersink fairly deep to make this work. I actually think that in the future, if I was going to do this, I would drill directly through the iPad case, and I would use the bolts to flush mount the iPad case just with a light countersink, because that should flex the iPad case enough to get it in. Because while Ben recommended screwing the case to the plywood, that didn't work for me. This is where I wrecked an iPad case. I screwed it in, and there's enough metal in the case that I bought that it just wouldn't suck the screw in tight. It just stripped out the hole and all the threads. So what I ended up doing was spreading wood glue across the back of the iPad, or back of the wood, and then gluing the case on there. Now this actually sealed my bolt hole, so I had to remember that I'd put the bolts in. And at first I was getting it set up and I almost didn't. I almost just glued it on and then I would have had no bolts and I would have had to peel it back off and wreck 2 iPad cases probably. So I put them in. The bolts were a fairly tight fit. So you notice actually I had to use an awl to tap the bolts deep enough in there because I just didn't have a countersink bit that was quite wide enough. And in fact, I lost the little set bolt to my countersink bit because I just made a mistake. So I had to buy a new one after 20 years. Then once I knew everything was all set up, I stained the piece of wood and waited. I waited about 2 hours, and I actually worked on some other shelves behind me. You can actually see them just over my shoulder. So LEDs are coming for those today, and then I'll start shooting back on my couch sometimes. Once I had stained it, it had dried enough, I put the bolts back in, put the glue across the back of the back of the wood, put the case, matched it up how I wanted it, put 2 8-pound weights on it, and actually stuck it here on my desk just to set for a while. And I finished off the shelves that I built over here. Then it was just a simple matter of coming into my office and bolting it on. It's quite easy, and I have a magnetic iPad holder, which is way cleaner. I keep looking at it and thinking, man, this is just beautiful. I also used, I can show you this because I've got it right here, plugged into my iPad beside me. One of these. That is a 90-degree USB-C dongle. So I bought them in a pack of 2, came with a 90 one way and a 90 the other way. You'll actually see, there's a link below on what exactly they are. And they work great. They just cleaned up my setup a lot for this so that I can have the cable go directly back out of the iPad and not have a bit of cable just kind of hanging around the edge. And that's it. Now it's really easy to pull my iPad off and on and just to stick it in one of the magnetic cases I have, and it's way cleaner, and I was kind of happy about the build. The build turned out pretty good. Like I said, there's a few things that I would do next time. I would get longer bolts. I would make sure that I will get a new countersink bit, and then I would probably pull the bolts right through. I think that would work. My concern there is that they would actually flex the iPad case enough, the back of it, that it would not sit flush. The iPad wouldn't sit flush. So maybe not. The other alternative there is to drill larger holes in the iPad case so that I could actually reach through with a bolt and have the bolt slightly recessed below the case, but I'd still glue the case on. That's it. If you liked the video, thumbs up below. If you loved it, then you subscribe and hit the bell so that YouTube lets you know what's happening. And if you really loved it, you want to see some other behind the scenes stuff on this, I've talked about this a couple times and shown the parts to the patrons at Patreon, and you can find that at patreon.com/CurtisMcHale. Have an excellent day.